Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Oh, good morning, Matt.
Morning, Stu.
This week we begin a new section of the Bible and a new edition of Thrive as we look at the books of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Matt, I was a little bit apprehensive, having read the book of Leviticus in particular before, and it feels pretty heavy going, and it is pretty heavy going. But I'm sure we're going to, for our listeners and for ourselves, discover some really important truths in here that actually still do.
Central truths.
Yeah, that
absolutely.
still impact us and can impact us today. So just to give people a little bit of insight, the events that we see happening here are really within the first year of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt.
Yeah.
They're still camped around Mount Sinai.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's the sort of time frame where this is happening. And the first part of it, which we're going to cover today of Leviticus, chapters 1 through to 7, really focus on God's instructions to Moses on two things really, how the people can get right with God so that they can connect with him, and then how they stay that way.
That's right. Yeah. So, we think of the law and we think of the 10 Commandments and we think of that as being the most important part. Actually, this section on essentially worship, it is about worship because life is about worship. This really is the central aspect of the law. And, that's marked by the fact that this is also the central book. Now, in Hebrew thinking, and particularly in literary structure, if you want to highlight something, you put it in the middle, right in the middle. So Leviticus is the middle of the 5 books of Moses. And of course, right at the center of that, we have the Day of Atonement. We'll cover that in a future episode.
Yes.
So this is instructions for worship that actually also lay, as you alluded to then, this lays all of the foundation for essentially all our Christian theology, our theology of worship and redemption, and it's all here, really. Yeah. And in fact, if there was one theme that really stands over this book as particularly descriptive of what's going on here, it is the theme of holiness to God. He is setting a people apart for himself. It shows the process by which God himself provides for this people to be forgiven, cleansed, and set apart. Of course, the 10 Commandments provides the sort of railings, as it were, or as we say, the rumble strips, as I've said it before, that mark the edge of the road.
Yeah.
But this is the road. I mean, worship is the road. It's a life of worship. And so, whereas you have thou shalt nots in the law that mark the edges, this is the thou shalt. This is do this, right?
Yes.
Live.
That's great.
And all of these ceremonies, I know when you read this, you think, what is going on here? This is such an unfamiliar world to us. It's actually really worth pointing out, Stu, that for an ancient person, this is very familiar.
Yep.
This is very, very familiar. In fact, notice the first verse of Leviticus. The Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. So this is continuing God's instructions to Moses on Mount Sinai, right?
Yeah.
So there's a continuity here. He said, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord. Now notice how it just assumes that this is what you do, right?
And they have been, potentially.
Yeah. And I guess it recognizes something universal. I mean, there's something very particular about this.
Yes.
But it's grounded in a sense of this universal sense that human beings have that there is a God who must be worshipped. And that gets garbled, but it's not completely wrong. I mean, a comment in Genesis that says in those days, people began to call upon the name of the Lord in chapter 5 there, showing basically that this is a universal sense in human beings that there is a God to whom we owe worship.
Yeah.
And these very tangible ways, making sacrifices, bringing first fruits, pretty much there's nothing here actually that is particularly new. What is new is that this is actually providing very specific instructions on how this is to be done. There are some quite different things about this. So they're not to do it in just any way anymore. You're not to approach God in any way you want.
Yes.
There is one specific way to do this, and it's through an ordained priesthood. This is the way that God has made. And so, as we'll see in the next episode, where we get to an occasion where Aaron's, the high priest's sons, decide we're going to do it
our way.
And actually, it probably wasn't something that they made up when Adab and Abihu offered what the text describes as strange fire. It's probably just something they borrowed from. It's a customary practice.
From something else.
And the point is, no. There's a specific way to do this because it's all pointing to something specific.
Yes.
Right? Essentially, this is three-dimensional theology. This is telling us ultimately about what God did for us in Christ.
Yeah. So I think that's a really key point to what was happening in the other nations, let's just say, or peoples who were potentially making offerings, is that was more to, in a sense, appease the gods. It was more like to feed the gods. Whereas this is God doing something for us, not us doing something for God.
That is the key. That is actually the key difference. In pagan religions in the ancient Near East, it was seen as being human beings. In fact, the whole purpose of human beings was to be servants of God, and in particular to feed the gods, right? We are the servants of God to feed the gods. So offerings are essentially doing something for the gods in the hope, and it was never assured.
Yes.
Okay, if your offering was good enough, then the God might show you favor. Now, one of the problems with that is that you were never assured of it. You had to, offer more and more and more. And in some cases, you had to go to the extreme and even offer up your own offspring, your own children, which was quite, again, common practice in the ancient world. That all is completely flipped because what these offerings are declaring is what God has done for us.
Yes.
Now, this point is made actually, it's set up much earlier in a very famous story of Abraham when God called him to go up to the mountain and offer his son Isaac as an offering to the Lord. And again, Abraham, as much as he would have been grieved by that, deeply grieved, of course, but he would not have been shocked by it because it was quite common. And essentially what God was saying is, I don't require this anymore because I'm going to provide for you. And of course, the brilliance of that story, for all of its difficulty, and it is in some ways a difficult story, is that it does prophetically symbolize what God did for us, that he came to us in Jesus Christ, who is the Son of God. In a sense, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son so that whoever believes in him might not perish but have eternal life. So that's the difference here. This is actually describing what God has given for us. So when someone brings burnt offering or a sin offering, they understood they're bringing, first of all, something that God has provided for them, right? It's his gracious provision for them. It's also God's provision for them as a substitute for their sins. So they're not buying favor with God. He has actually given it to them.
He's
and the burnt offering is a response
that's right,
to the fact that God has already bound himself by covenant with his people to bless his people. Yeah. And that's where this is where the story is important. Because the fact that this is pointed out by Paul in the New Testament, right? When he talks about grace, it's all by grace, always been by grace through faith, because God promised to bless Abraham, and that's the order. The blessing comes first. God provides for us. He blesses us. We don't buy that. And so all of these offerings need to be understood in the light of that we are in the position of response. We're not invoking God here.
No.
It's hard to overstate the importance of that difference. And from that flows all the differences, like all the specific instructions. None of it's designed to win the gods or to win the gods over or to, there's no divination here. It's all designed to symbolize what God has done for us.
Yes.
Now, of course, they're looking forward as we look back.
Yes.
But that's the difference here.
Yes. That's great.
To underscore that, and this is a good bridge, Stu, to the first of these sacrifices, which is the burnt offering, which is the most common. Burnt offerings were offered in the daily sacrifices. Burnt offerings and grain offerings, in fact, together were offered daily in the temple. Paul in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, says, therefore, in view of God's mercy, let us offer our bodies as living sacrifices. He's talking about the burnt offering. He's using this imagery of the burnt offering. And he's pointing to what the burnt offering always symbolized, which is actually the giving of ourselves over to God in devotion to God, but not as a way of invoking God. And this is where, again, context is important because Paul has just explained what God has done for us. The first part of Romans is all about what God has done for us. Yeah. And so that's why he says, therefore, in view of God's mercy, let us offer our bodies as living sacrifices. So it's
a response.
It's a response. And that's what's going on here. So we have, in summary, Stu, we have 5 different offerings here that we're going to talk about today. They're all designed to facilitate different kinds of responses and slightly, well, I say different needs, but I think I prefer different opportunities.
Yes.
Different responses to God. And in one way or another, they are all responses. There's nothing here that's about invoking God or anything like that. And the burnt offering is a key to this. This is a response that God, having devoted himself to us, calls us now to devote ourselves to him. And this is what's signified in the burnt offering. Now, there's a lot of overlap with these offerings. So the burnt offering contains the atonement elements of, for example, the Day of Atonement. It contains the atonement elements of the sin offerings and so forth. So all of the blood sacrifices have this atonement element built in, because how can God accept us, we who are unholy? He accepts us through a work of atonement. Now, atonement, good way to remember what atonement means, is at one-ment.
Yes.
It's making the two one.
Yep.
Atonement is about reconciliation. It's satisfying divine justice so that we're made right with God.
Right.
So that's what atonement really is.
And of course, we've seen the blood offering in the Exodus story before they left, where the blood was put on the pillars of the doors.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's, the Passover lamb, again, is pointing forwards, to this. I mean, there are lots of different offerings, and there are seasonal offerings like the Passover, like the Day of Atonement, in different ways. Look, in different ways, there's a core to them that is saying the same thing. Wherever blood is shed, it's offered as proof of payment.
Yes.
Now, there's lots of splattering of blood going on here.
There is.
And I think this is where it's important to take the blood as proof of payment. It was never to be ingested. This is actually an important difference, because the ingesting of blood in some cultures is about, taking in the strength and the life of the animal or whatever.
Yes.
But this is forbidden because you are empowered by the life of God, not by an animal.
By the blood of an animal.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the blood is offered because the life of the animal is in the blood. And by shedding the blood, the life of the animal has been poured out in atonement.
Yes.
And so the blood then becomes, I guess, a symbol of the payment. And so on the Day of Atonement, it's taken in through the curtain and it's sprinkled on the atonement cover of the ark. It's proof of payment there. So wherever you see that, a blood being splattered around, I know it sounds a little macabre, but it's the idea here is that it has this, and again, this is difficult for us to imagine, but it has a sort of cleansing, it cleanses of guilt because it's the proof of payment, right?
Yes.
It's like it covers your debts in a sense. And I know it's a cliche for us Christians, the idea of being cleansed in the blood. I mean, we've got to be careful when we throw that phrase around, because it sounds really weird to outsiders.
Yes.
So a little explanation is needed. And what are we cleansed from? We're cleansed from debt, right? Because the blood is proof of payment.
Yeah,
okay,
that's great.
So some of the elements here, and the key difference, maybe I'll work from some of the distinctive things about this offering. Well, the big distinctive thing is the burnt offering. Whereas other offerings were eaten and shared in different ways, this was given completely over to God. This is actually the point. This is the key symbolic point that this is making. And it seems like a bit of a waste, like the whole thing, the whole carcass. I mean, animals they're valuable, but the whole carcass is basically burnt on the altar. So it's given wholly over to God. And so that's the symbolism here. It symbolizes the worshipper giving themselves complete surrender, giving yourself completely to God. So you would identify with that animal by laying your hand on its head as it's being killed. Okay, so it's...
Or as you killed it.
Yeah, there's an involvement here. This is, I think, the dynamism. You've got to imagine, and I think one of the things that I appreciate about it, it's all very dramatic and probably hard for us to imagine. But our problem, I think, Stu, is that we get a bit abstract with the way that we think. We think about these things in very theoretical, abstract terms. This was experiential for them. Now, it's meant to be experiential for us. And actually, things like the Lord's Supper and baptism are meant to provide that experiential link. There's an acknowledgement here that we're embodied, and that rituals like this, physical rituals, help to ingrain truths. We learn not just with our minds, but with our bodies.
Yes.
I think this is important.
Is it also the physical witness of what you do as well?
Yeah.
I think sometimes when we, and I know this is not really a good line to draw here, but when we ask people to come forward, it's because it's easy for us to sit in our seat and go, yes, but the physical act of stepping and going forward actually proclaims something to other people as well.
Yeah, that's right. So physical gestures are important. And again, we're quite an intellectualist society, and we rest on texts and abstract ideas. And I mean, the average person here, they don't have an education. So their learning is through participation, participation in these rituals. It's ingraining certain things. This actually also, Stu, this is really going to help to explain the strangest part of the book of Leviticus, which is the purity laws, which I think a lot of our modern readers will find naturally very objectionable. But I'm looking forward to getting to that, because actually there's something really important about what that ingrains and what God is building into his people. Yeah. So the physical act, let me picture it actually. And I think it's worth, listeners, looking up a picture of the tabernacle to get a sense of what this would have looked like. So you're walking in, you're bringing your offering. Yep, your burnt. We're talking about the burnt offering.
Yes, sorry.
Depending, of course, on who you are, there are different kinds of burnt offerings too. By the way, there are different levels. No one is excluded. If you can't bring this animal, you can bring. It caters for everyone. So you're bringing your offering, and between you and the tent, wherein lies the holy place and the most holy place. Yep. And you're going to have this sense. In this original context, the cloud of the Lord is hovering over this thing. It's like the fire of the Lord, right? So, so there's a sense in which this is like the portal to heaven, right? This tent, right? Now, between you and the tent is the altar of sacrifice. And that's either it's bad feng shui or good theology, Stuart. I suggest it's the latter. It's the latter.
Oh, I'm glad you suggest that.
Because the message that you're getting is that you have access to God, but it's through sacrifice. And the interaction with God is symbolized by what happens on that altar, by what gets offered on that altar, and by what gets given in the courts, right? So, you come in, you bring your animal, you lay your hand on its head, slit its throat. This is a dramatic thing. Look, probably more for us than for them, because they were killing animals all the time.
Yes.
But still, this is your most precious animal.
I was just going to say
this is an animal that you've set aside from your flock. So it's actually not just like any other random, decrepit animal in your flock.
Let's grab the weakest one and take it up.
Yeah. You've probably set aside the best animal. You've kept it close to your house. Your kids have probably gotten to know it. Maybe they've given it a name. I don't know this. I don't know this stuff. But
the point is there.
But I think there's some indication of this in very famous story of David after he committed adultery with Bathsheba, and Nathan comes to him. He tells this parable about a rich man and a poor man, and about a poor man that had this ewe lamb that he brought up, and it ate from his hands, and and how he loved this ewe lamb. And I think that's the sort of picture you need to keep in mind, because that's the animal. They didn't have pets as such, but they did put aside special animals for these offerings. So you're bringing that, bringing this animal. It's without defect, and it is standing in. It stands in for you first of all. So when you're laying your hand on its head and killing the animal, the understanding is that this animal stands in for you. So first of all, the animal takes upon itself the wages of sin, which is death.
Yes.
And it takes away that sin. Now, in the Day of Atonement, one of the animals is actually going to be sent away into the desert to really picture this idea of your sins being taken away, right? Yeah. But even in the burnt offering, this is what's happened. Now, I should hasten to say here, the animal is a symbol of the one that really takes away our sin. Okay, so which is Christ. So this is pointing forward to Christ. But you would exercise your faith in God's provision for your sin by going through this ritual. And, your faith isn't in the animal, it's in the fact that God, and this is where the difference is important that we pointed out before, Stu, because your faith isn't in how good your offering is. It's in God's provision. That God has provided the sacrifice. It's not that it's enough, or because, different people with different resources offered different kinds of offering, and there was no sense that, if you offer the bull, it's better than if you offer the lamb or the whatever.
Although I think there was an element of self-assessment in that, because you could afford the bull, but you decide to bring the doves. It says if you cannot afford. So I think there's an element where God's going to see through us if we're just trying to bring the cheapest thing possible.
Yeah, that's right.
And keep our prized bull, in a sense. And so there's an element of self-reflection really to go, I need to be willing to bring my best here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then
once you've slit the throat, the blood is then put down
scattered against the sides of the altars. That's right. And it's then put on the altar, and it's burnt on the altar. And there's a very interesting repeated statement that's made. It's a food offering to God, and that is a symbol of fellowship. It's an aroma pleasing to the Lord. I think, how could the carcass of an animal but what is pleasing to the Lord is you. So the sense that when the animal is offered on the altar, it's symbolically taken your sins.
Yes.
But it's consumed on the altar, and then the smoke goes up and it's received by God. So your worship, in other words, is received by God as pleasing. Right. That's the symbolism here.
Yeah.
It's almost like whatever's put on the altar is transformed, and it rises up to go to God. And again, this idea of worship, the idea of us putting ourselves on the altar before God. And being therefore transformed into something previously not pleasing to God, to one who is pleasing to God. Why? Not because we were good enough, but because through Christ and his sacrifice, we offered ourselves wholly to God, and we become pleasing to him.
And there's still an element of faith in that, because you have to take God at his word that by doing that, your sins are going to be forgiven.
Yeah,
and of course, again, this points forward to Christ. We see Paul write in Ephesians 5:2 about Jesus being that offering, essentially, that was for us. Yeah.
Notice how that statement is repeated each time it goes through the different things that you can offer depending on what you can afford. If it's not a bull, if the offering is from the flock, it's an aroma pleasing to the Lord. If the offering is of birds, if it's a dove or a pigeon, still, it's an offering pleasing to the Lord.
Yeah.
So,
because it's about our heart position, the fact that we're taking this.
That's right.
To be right with God.
Yeah. It's worth remembering that according to Luke, the offering that Joseph and Mary brought when they presented Jesus in the temple, what you would come is that you would offer a burnt offering. What they offered was the doves. It was the bird. So it shows that they were the poorest at the poorest level. Yeah. So I think that's significant. Okay. So that's the first one, Stu. The second one is the grain offering. And basically the grain offering is an acknowledgement of God's provision. It's a way of acknowledging that everything comes from God. Everything belongs to God. The land that you're growing your crops on, that you're raising your flocks, is all from God. But the grain offering specifically bread is associated with food, right? So it's give us today our daily bread. This idea of grain is associated with daily provision. So by giving to God a portion of your grain, it's essentially an acknowledgement of God's provision for you. Yeah. Okay. And there are specific instructions.
But also a fruit of your labor. You've worked to grow that, and you're bringing that and giving it, recognizing that God's the one who's enabled that to happen.
Yeah,
correct.
That's right. So for example, the offering of the first fruits is a kind of grain offering.
Yes.
The first fruits is basically the first grain from the harvest. By offering that to God, it's a gesture of putting God first. But these aren't just first fruits. These are, in a way, you would do this as a way of regularly recognizing that God is providing
that sustenance,
all that you have. Yeah, that's right. So, there's some instructions there. We don't need to get too into some of this, but just a couple of things here, Stu. So first of all, it's to be offered without yeast. Now, yeast is associated with fermentation, which symbolizes corruption, right? So it's to be without yeast. It's also, it says you're not to burn any yeast or honey in the food offering. Again, that association with fermentation. Is there. And then there's this mention of salt as well. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant out of your offering. And the reason for this, salt is important because salt is a preservative and it causes things to endure. And salt was therefore a symbol that God's commitment to you, which is his provision is a sign of his commitment to you.
Yeah.
Is enduring.
Yeah.
And salt is a symbol of that endurance. So that's what's going on. So all the different parts of this, again, we might say in our culture, well, God's love is enduring, and we remember that in an abstract thing. We might recite it sort of creedally or something.
Yes.
They remembered this through the physical act of taking something quite expensive, actually, salt, and making sure they didn't leave out the salt, because, and again, they're being reminded through this act, God, his love is enduring, and his commitment is an enduring commitment. So that's what's going on there. The fellowship offering, which is the third one, this makes sense against the background, first of all, of the practice of hospitality in the ancient world. To share a meal with someone is a symbol of friendship between the two. And in fact, one of the things that happens in Exodus, God calls Moses and the leaders up, and they have this meal in the presence of God, and it's that's a ritual meal. It's essentially a meal of fellowship, and that's what's happening here. But a fellowship offering, or a peace offering, as it's otherwise known, this is what you would bring if God had done something particular in your life. Okay. You would bring this offering, and you would share it,
prayer, or whatever it might be.
And this is actually this is an offering, whereas the burnt offering was burnt up in the on the altar and completely, and whereas the sin and the guilt offering, and in fact the grain was used by the priest, that was given and used by the priest, because these offerings also provided for the priests as well. This one, it's the same, but it was also shared with your community and your family, right? So basically, this is a party.
Yes.
This is a celebration party for something that God has done for you, and you're celebrating by sharing with your community, with the priest, but in the presence of God. So, as Psalm 23 says, you have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. There's a sense of peace. I can have peace even in the presence of my enemies, because that table that God has set, it's actually a table of friendship between the psalmist in that case, who's writing that, and God. He's saying, because you're my friend, I don't care who my enemies are. I can have peace in the presence, like I can eat quietly in the presence of my enemies, because this very table you have set before me is a symbol of my friendship with you.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of thing that's going on here. So when the psalmist in Thanksgiving Psalms, for example, like Psalm 116, he'll say, I will fulfill my vows to God. He'll be referring to vows to bring an offering and vows to bring glory to God in the event that God answers. So it goes actually on to talk, I will bring an offering to you. And when the offerings are mentioned like that in those Thanksgiving Psalms, in response, because of what you've done, I'm going to bring an offering, this is what it's referring to.
That's great. I think the peace aspect of that one too speaks a bit to me about reconciliation as well. So obviously there's peace with God, but also, as you just said, peace with my enemies. That call in a sense to make sure that if there's relationships that need to be restored, that we're making the effort to restore those relationships.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just some details again, and we don't have time to go through in deep dive through all of the details, but some key things here. First of all, I said that you're sharing this with your family, but it's in God's presence, and there's a sense in which God is part of the party, right? You're bringing something to God, and you're sharing a meal, as it were, with God. It's important to note that the best portion was given over to God.
Yes.
So, and we probably don't think of, when we think of the innards, because it says here the internal organs and all the fat. The kidneys and the fat near them and the loins and the liver and all of this. I mean, that's that we think, and throw that away. No, that's particularly precious, that stuff. The fat is the most valuable part, actually. Yeah. I know we're going to cut off the fat and all this sort of stuff, but that's not the way that these people thought. So that's actually burnt on the altar, and that the best part, the best portion is given over to God.
Yes.
The rest is shared, becomes the meat for the party. And the other detail here is just notice the repetition. There's still you lay your hand on its head and you slaughter in front, and Aaron's son splashed the blood against the sides of the altar and so forth. So
again, I just want to highlight, because for me this really stood out. You're the one bringing your offering, and you have to do the killing.
Yeah.
You can't abdicate that to someone else.
Yeah.
You have to be the one who puts your hand on that animal's head and do that. And so there's a sense of the weightiness of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's the idea of the fellowship offering. Now we come to the sin
offering.
And the guilt offering. Now, the statement that's made here, Stu, the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, this is Leviticus chapter 4, when anyone sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands. Now, what does it mean by unintentionally? Yes. Now, of course, it's things that we do without realizing it. There's that. But what this is trying to avoid is these offerings becoming an excuse to sin. Well, I can do whatever I want. I'll rob my neighbor. I'll do this. I'll do this. I'll break all of the 10 commandments because, hey, all I need to do is go and bring the sacrifice and it's all over.
Yeah.
We might refer to that as sinning with a high hand, this intentional, no, I'm going to sin against the Lord. That's intentional. But, falling under temptation, these sorts of things are, I think can be considered here as unintentional if we understand intentional as that sinning with a high hand. And yes. I think in the context, that is what is in view here because, again, in an ancient context, actually not just in an ancient context, Stu, where you could easily take God's grace as an excuse to sin. In fact, the New Testament don't use the grace of God as an excuse to sin, right? That's always going to be a danger, and that's the danger that this is trying to avoid, right? If you're intent on going astray and sinning against God, then don't come, this doesn't really cover that.
Yeah, it's such a good point because if you take that word unintentionally out of that verse and you read it, it's like, oh, well, if you sin, just do this and it'll be right, mate.
So it's understandable that they're going to want to avoid that, right?
And so it puts the onus on us to not intentionally.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the whole point of the burnt offering is a symbol of the fact that I'm devoting myself completely to God.
Fully,
to walk in God's ways, right? That's what that symbolized. The big criticism that the prophets like Isaiah had of the Israelites in the period of the monarchy is that this became this ritual that I'll just go off and do whatever I want. Oh, but I'll just come and I'll offer these sacrifices.
And it'll all be fine.
That I'll come and bring burnt offerings and and the prophets are saying, get away from me with these sacrifices because they are meaningless. Not that they're ultimately meaningless, but they're meaningless for these people who are sinning with a high hand and then thinking, I'm right with God because I offered my sin offering and then I offered my burnt offering and I brought my first fruits and I've ticked all the boxes and I'm fine. Well, no, you're not.
And I think, you're spot on. I think even Ezekiel, I can't remember whether it was Ezekiel or not, but it's like actually you're better to bring nothing if you're going to bring it with a heart like that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the sin offering, which really is a responsive offering. This is not the regular. In a sense, the Day of Atonement is the regular.
Yes,
and also remember the burnt offerings contain this element of atonement. The sin and the guilt offerings are basically for responding to times of failure.
Which actually requires confession. And the fact that you're doing that is confessing that you've done something.
Yeah, that's right. So if you have failed to do something that you should have done, or if you've done something that you shouldn't have done, in that sense of unintentional that we've just as we've defined it, this is what these offerings are for. So it's interesting to note here that there are slightly different rituals depending on who you are, and this is very interesting because the sin of one doesn't necessarily have the same weight as the sin of another. Now, we're all equal before God, but some people have more responsibility, and therefore the weight of their sins is greater.
More accountability.
Right. So, first of all, the sin of the priest is right up there.
Yes.
Okay? So, the ritual that he goes through involves carrying the blood into the tent of meeting. Now, that's not going to be the case with just the individuals. That's just splashed against the altar.
Yes.
But there's a level of seriousness here. He's to present a bull and he's to carry the blood right into the sanctuary because this is kind of a really serious thing. The next level is if the whole Israelite community sins. It's actually hard for us to imagine. How can a community sin? Well, a community can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
A community, you can be complicit. A whole group of people can be complicit in that. And there's also a high level of seriousness to this too, which is marked by the fact that, again, the blood of the goes through all of the Same ritual, by the way, the laying the hands on its head and the slaughtering of the animal. There's that atonement thing. But again, with the community, the blood is taken into the tent of the meeting and it's sprinkled before the Lord 7 times, right? The idea there in both of those cases, because of this seriousness, it goes into the tent of meeting, and the 7 times is a symbol of completeness, the sprinkling 7 times. And, remarkably it says, and they will be forgiven. I mean, this is the grace of God here, right? He's saying,
it's not hopefully it happens.
Yeah.
It will happen.
You will be forgiven.
Yeah.
But this is, again, going back to a point that we just made, this is also why this is for unintentional, right? In the way that we've defined it. This is not an excuse to sin because, and that's why that point is important, because each time it does say you can count on being forgiven.
Yes.
But not if you've sinned with a high hand, as it were. So then there's the leader. And from here, just an ordinary leader that's not a priest, a leader in the community, whoever that leader is, a clan leader or elder or something, goes through the same ritual, but the blood is splattered on the base of the altar.
Yes.
Again, proof of payment. By the way, the fat in inner parts are offered on the altar, similar with the fellowship offering.
Yes.
These offerings, the meat itself is consumed by the priest.
That's right.
That's a part of it. And then there's the ordinary member of the community, and that again the blood is taken and put on the base of the altar. And again, it says when the fat is removed and it's burnt on the altar and in the fire and the smoke goes up, it will be received as an aroma pleasing to the Lord, and you will be forgiven.
Yes.
So not just you'll be forgiven and I'll cope with you, but no, you go back to being pleasing to the Lord.
That's great.
Yeah. The guilt offering is there particularly for cases where something needs to be done to make amends.
Restitution. Yep.
Yeah, it involves restitution, right? Mm-hmm. So you've sinned, but there's an element of sort of something between you and another person. Yeah. So it's not enough. Again, this is trying to cut off all the things that people might do. I've stolen their goods, but hey, I've offered my, I yielded to temptation, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I stole from my neighbor, but hey, I've made it right, so off I go. No. That's a case where you actually need to make amends with them too, and so there's some reparation to be made. So just to detail to add here, so it covered situations where you're making reparation to actually either God or to other people, because there's also, it involves the desecration of holy things as well.
Yes.
So there's some reparation to make to God or other people, and this is where the restitution is, and it's 20%, it's a fifth. It was Zacchaeus, of course, says, I'll pay back 4 times.
Yes.
But the requirement was the 20% on top of whatever you agreed was the value. You had to agree on the value.
That's right.
And then you would add 20%. So that's kind of how that works. So, again, an important thing, important lesson there, Stu. It's not enough just to be forgiven. We actually have to make it right
with the person,
with the person, and make amends with the person,
which is actually what protects community. Right? Otherwise, these things build up, don't they?
Yeah. So those are the offerings, and then what we have in chapter 6 and into chapter 7 is we kind of have the footnotes, of this and some details on how that's to happen, and that's because in the first lots of instructions, it really wants to give you the big ideas, and then it sort of comes back and gives you some assorted details on how all that's to be done.
So just before you wrap up, a couple of things that I highlighted. I really had a look at where Leviticus 1 through to 7 sort of points forward to Christ. And obviously the burnt offering, we've got Christ's complete sacrifice, which we can read about in Hebrews 10:10. We've got the grain offering, which is Christ as the bread of life, which we see in John 6:35. The peace offering, Christ our peace, Romans 5:1. The sin offering, Christ who became sin for us, which is what, the sin offering was. The animal essentially becomes the sin for us, which we see in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And then the guilt offering was the fact that Christ who paid for our debt in full, which we see in Isaiah 53. And the other thing that kind of stood out to me, Matt, as we read through all of this, and, we don't have to put our hands on the heads of animals and cut throats, all of that anymore. But I think something that really stood out to me is the specifics of this. It's not haphazard. It's like it needed to be the right offering, offered by the right person in the right way,
exactly
at the right time. That was how you got essentially restored in relationship. And then to stay in relationship, you had to continue to abide by God's laws.
Yeah,
and that's still true of us.
It's
for us
still
today.
true. It's right, because it's not about what you do.
No.
You don't set the terms.
Yes.
This is based in what God will do. And this is why there's no flexibility, right? Because God has provided a lamb.
And it's a specific lamb.
A lamb, right?
Yeah, that's it.
He has provided a lamb. And this points forward, it's not anything. It's not just, the more you can do, or however you want to do it. No. Because it's not about what you do. This is a symbol of what God did for us, right? So the specificity here is so important, again, because this is three-dimensional theology. They are learning things about God and about what God has done for them. And so that's where there's no flexibility here in this, because it's perhaps the rigor with which we, particularly since the Reformation, would give to, the formulation of our doctrines. We, as Protestants, we kind of think we need to be pretty pedantic, right, about our beliefs. And indeed we should. It's important. It's the same idea here, because if you just mess with this and change things, it's fundamentally changing core tenets of belief. You're changing what this is saying.
Well, and also it's the foundation of our faith, really. It's like there is only one who can pay the price for us.
Right.
That is Jesus. There's only one way that price could be paid, and it was paid with him on the cross for us.
Yeah.
And there's only one way we can accept that offering, and that's to believe in faith that offering is enough for us to be made right with God. And then to stay in that state, we have to continue to obey God's way for our lives.
Yeah. So I said it at the start, this establishes, all the theology that lies behind what Christ, did for us. So the idea of we wouldn't have the idea of substitutionary atonement if we didn't have this, right? That's how we understood why did he have to suffer and die, and, the shedding of blood and why is all that? It's because of this, because he is fulfilling this, right? So this is how we understand what we actually have in Christ. But as we read these sections, I mean, all of this is still relevant in that we are to bring an offering of worship, burnt offering, right? Of course, we're to still do that, but we're not bringing a sacrifice, an offering that symbolizes us. We're actually, it's us. We're bringing ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So it's not about which, as Jesus says in John 4, it's not about which mountain. He says, those who worship me will worship in spirit and in truth, right? And the idea there is that we essentially do what fulfills this. We're not sweeping this aside, as Jesus indeed didn't sweep aside the law. He said, I've come not to sweep it aside or abolish it. I've come to fulfill it, right? So as we read these, this is what with our lives we're meant to fulfill, right? Identification with Christ, the burnt offering, the giving of ourselves as living sacrifices, wholly over to God, right? It's important that we know that when we do this, we are a pleasing aroma to God. He doesn't just put up with us. We are pleasing to God when we do this. The grain offering, he still calls us to come and acknowledge his provision for us. I mean, the New Testament is full of encouragement to come and bring an offering before God. We can express our thanks in very tangible ways, and bringing monetary offerings to God is an expression of that, and so, I think there are practical ways with the, the grain offering. There are very practical ways in which we can essentially do the same kind of thing, be responsive to God. And
whether that's our talents, our abilities, or our finances, or all of those things. Really.
The fellowship offering, we practice this in the Lord's Supper.
We do.
This is what the Lord's Supper is. It's a meal in the presence of God, with all of the symbolism of the broken body and the shed blood. This is what it is. It's the actual. We're celebrating the peace of the fellowship offering, and then of course the sin and the guilt offering, understanding that there's amends to be made where that's necessary. But this is pointing to the fact that when we do sin and we're repentant and we come to God in repentance, as it promises us again and again, we will be forgiven, and that's a promise.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.